Everyone, it is our usual 4 o'clock Central Eastern Time Grad Clinic. Especially excited today because we have some really great questions that you sent this week that I've got lined up for you. We've got several good live demonstrations. So it's going to be a very practical, hands-on session that you're going to walk away learning how, one, to export seamlessly from some of the major databases out there, Pubmed, Web of Science. We're going to use Web of Science as an example. Thanks to Joanne for sending that query through. I know it's something that some of you may have wasted hours on, and if you haven't done it before, it's going to save you so much time to get this right. So really excited to share that with you about a question that many of you have posed to me, and I haven't had enough time to get into it. And it is, do you need a website? And there's a superficial answer and a deeper answer that involves your engagement on social media. And then finally, we're going to come to Brian Hansen in the group. Brian, I'm just going to have you say hi to everybody. Hey, Brian, good to have you here. We're going to come to Brian. We're going to come to you last. We've been working on one of Brian's papers together for his master's thesis on media bias and the police. Really fantastic topic, and Brian, thanks so much for being willing to share with us. So we're saving you last but not least to come and roll up our sleeves and actually do some work together on your thesis. So guys, as usual, we have a bunch of new members in the group. Some of you are joining from LinkedIn. Some of you are joining from YouTube. If you haven't already joined our Facebook group, FastTrackGrad, that's where the action's at. You're going to find over 30 hours of masterclasses, training on productivity, writing, the material that I wish I would have had as a grad to help me amplify my career. And the reality is that about 1 in 3 students who start a master's or start a PhD don't finish. And that's a terrible loss on an investment you're making, on the valuable time you have to invest in yourself and in your education. And I've been there. I know what that feels like. I came from a small program in Texas where I didn't have any contacts, and I had my back up against the wall. Was on the verge of flunking out. Felt like I was going in circles, and was completely lost until I found a supportive mentor, took me under his wing, helped show me the ropes, and that really helped me fly. Flash forward to the present, I got into Yale, then got on to the tenure track at Harvard, became a full professor in Oxford by the time I was 30. And now I started FastTrackGrad to really help support you avoid some of the most common pitfalls that I see grads falling into during their grad journey. So with that, let's dive straight in. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And what I want to do is take us into Web of Science. So, hope you guys can all see this. I've got to log in library portal. That is kind of a first tip. So, I'm coming to you from Bocconi in Milan, where I'm a full professor. And so, always to make things simple, take advantage of the access that your university has. It's a great value that you get from your university, access to a range of information. Like here, we get complimentary New York Times, lots of things. Sometimes I see a lot of students, they don't even realize these resources are available to them. Very powerful for research. And one of them that we're going to use right now is Web of Science. So Joanne was struggling export information from Web of Science. So now I've come through, and you can see in the header here, I've come through Bocconi's access, but that's not enough. You also want to make sure that you sign in with Web of Science, because that's how Web of Science, the Web of Science sees you as University of Bocconi, but Web of Science can see you within University of Bocconi. So go ahead, it is completely free. Log in with Web of Science. So now you can see I'm still with Uni of Bocconi, my university, but I have my own platform here. And that's going to be important for being able to export in Web of Science. So the other thing you're going to know, if you've been following the guide section of Facebook group, where we've got a start to finish course on how to do a systematic review, which is my recommended entry point to doing research fast. That's going to give you mastery of your subject and kind of open up an agenda for research, is to do a systematic review. That's going to be in the first guide section. Again, you're going to find that in the Facebook group. So come here, as you know, if you follow that, to advanced search. And I'm just going to do something very basic that's not going to get too many hits. So I'm just going to do a quick search. I'm going to limit it to just to get something to show you guys how to export. Let's go and just search the topic, which is gonna, here we go, topic search. And let's do social protection. Here we go, and TB. And this is a search I've done before. And again, we're just using this for illustrative purposes, right? If I were going to do this fully, I'd have permutations on tuberculosis and others, but I just want to show you guys what this looks like. Let's see, we get a reasonable number of hits. Okay, we've got 93 studies. That's going to be good for our example. Here you can see our studies. And what you'll get once you've logged in, if you haven't logged in, you won't get this. You will get the option to export. Now, really, this is straightforward and relatively easy. Needs not to cause difficulty. And I'm just going to send a welcome to everybody here in the Facebook Live. 1 second as we're doing this. Welcome, everyone. What you want to do is you want to export, and how you export is going to depend on the reference manager you're using. Joanne shared with me she's using Endnote, so we're going to use Endnote today. But we've also got a Zotero training that takes you start to finish how to use this in Zotero, which I like because Zotero is open access and completely free. But just export here to Endnote desktop. And what you want to do is pay attention to this. Don't just happily click through. You want to get all the records. So if you do all records on page, you're only going to get 50. So 1 to 1,000, we got 93 here. That's good. I like to get the full record. So this will by default only give you a partial record. Get the full record. If you want to do citation analysis or real heavy lifting bibliometrics, network analysis, take the cited references as well. But the vast majority of uses, you just need the full record. So I'm going to export that, save that here. And let me go ahead and open up my EndNote. So this will sync. So you can see I've got EndNote here. You can do this. There's a version of EndNote online. You could also do it that way. My computer runs a little bit slow when I'm streaming and recording the screen, but this is just pulling up here. And let me pull this onto the screen as well so you guys can see. Now, within EndNote, what is going to be helpful to you is to create a new library. So this is kind of often a first step. Let's create a new library, and we'll just call this tuberculosis. So you just need a blank library. Maybe you already have one. That's okay too, to drop things into. And now I'm just going to go straight to my file here. I'm just going to open it up, and it's pretty straightforward. That it will begin to import the references. So now I'm going to check something here because this gave me 27. I may have accidentally clicked on a wrong piece. Maybe I only got the ones that are showing, or I limited a filter in one way. So give me 2 seconds to make sure that I did that correctly. So I'm just going to duplicate what I did here. EndNote desktop. Let's get all the records. Let's get the full record. Export. Okay. I'm going to move this on a desktop. Let me just clear this out because this is not what I want. 1 second. And yeah, let's open back up now. Okay, this is now this is curious. I'm actually getting a bug myself in the troubleshoot because I'm only getting 27 of the references, curiously. So I'm going to troubleshoot this and figure out exactly why, if I've got some hidden filter that I'm not aware of on here. Page 3. Other way to do this is 53. No, you definitely want to come back out of this. 1 second. Let me get rid of here. And I'll tinker with this a couple times, but there's some, let me just go 1 to 93 and make sure it exports all of them in full record. Of course, I troubleshooted this a moment ago, and then I may be having a version glitch. Let me just clear out all my references and do this again. I mean, sometimes you will find you may end up having to troubleshoot a couple times if this doesn't go as seamlessly as you want the first time. I've recently switched myself over to EndNote, to Zotero. I'm just going to call this test library and pull this back up. So I've recently switched over myself because I think it's just getting updated in a better way than the paid version of EndNote. If I wanted to go through and troubleshoot this further, I might go through and export to BibTeX and then import into EndNote. but I want to make this easy for you guys to do it in the automated way. This should save as a CIW file. So let me make sure we get that as a CIW file, and I'll just do this in a simple way at the moment. And so when something goes buggy, usually you want to go step by step to try to deconstruct where the bug could be coming from. Okay, so I just imported there, and now I just got in test library all 98. So it looks like there might have been some bug. I'm going to delete this and do this again. There might have been some bug that I won't be able to troubleshoot fully in this section. I'm going to delete it and do this again from scratch just to show you. Don't despair if sometimes things, this is very common, like even for an experienced researcher like me, sometimes things go buggy. So I just created this new library, test library, and I exported here, desktop, and I specified the number of records. And this time I did a more limited export. Something appears to have potentially gone buggy with the full record. So I'm going to try that again in a second. I'm just going to replace the file, and let's go ahead and do this. And now it's getting 93. So not sure why the full record was getting glitchy. It may have only, I'm actually really mystified. It's just this, when things go wrong, I like to know why. Usually you do want the full record. So you should be able to, it's been a while since I've done this, get the full record. I'm gonna try one more time because maybe I have fixed the bug now. So what I've done is I've traced one thing at a time. Instead of all records, I'm specifying the number of the records. And now I'm going through and doing the full record, and that will kind of pinpoint for me, is the glitch the full record, or is the glitch is the glitch something else, such as I didn't specify the right number of articles and it only gave me what was listed on the page. So it does seem to be, this tells me, that data tells me that there's something going wrong at the moment with the full record export. So I would say, I don't know if that's a glitch right now in Clarivate or Web of Science, or maybe there's limited filter, but work with that. And then I would suggest then at this point, do all the records 1 to 93 and do yours. You're going to get most of what you need just from the author, title, source, and abstract. Still a little bizarre because I prefer the full record, but you'll see as I pull this in, you're going to get about 90% of what you need. And I'll go back and check that with Web of Science for you guys, because yeah, now this is bizarre. This time it's only doing a partial export. So it's clearly a little buggy, guys. That only 47 this time. Not sure why. I'll troubleshoot that more. But this is why it's very important just to really pay attention to what you're getting. And I think what I'm seeing is the clearest way to do this is probably just to select this in 2 batches. If you're having problems, you can do one export and then do another export if it's only letting you go partially. And I remember I had to do this sometimes if I have many thousands. The max Web of Science will let you do is say 1,000 at a time. I'm going to do this very quickly again for another outlet. So if we do this in Pubmed, we'll get straight into advanced, and let's just replicate our search. So title, abstract, let's just do social protection and TV. And we'll do the same thing. We're just going to add this to our history. Here we get 98. You see there's very similar coverage across the 2 data sets. And here you have the option. Here you want to do it through send to, and you can send it to a citation manager directly. And again, all results, create the file. And here we go. Get this nice library file. This time we'll do it a little bit differently. Sometimes opening up directly will work. Okay, this worked seamlessly the first try in Pubmed. Definitely got it to work in Web of Science, but it took a little bit of tweaking on the parameters to get it just right, where Pubmed was much more straightforward for the search. So if you guys can have some challenges in getting this out, this is going to save you so much time. I don't know if you've gone through and using your reference manager and put in references manually, one at a time. I recently did a survey of some of our grad students, and 2 and 3 had never used a reference manager before. Some had even done their theses without these references, and you just lose so much time, and it creates such a mess trying to organize things. One of the great values here is maybe you have complex sets of literature. We're going to be talking with Brian in a second about how he has some literature that some looks at the impacts of negative media on the police force. Some look at evidence on whether there is a media bias. And this can be really useful because you can create subcategories in your references. You can create groups of references and start moving things over to there. So I might create a group of certain types of references to help me stay organized. Because most of your projects are going to be extremely complex. You're going to be dealing with a lot of information, and you do need some system to stay on top of that, or you'll end up feeling like you're drowning. So, okay, let's keep going here. I want to move to the next question. Any questions about that, by the way? If you prefer Zotero over Endnote, why are we using Endnote now? This was because Joanne in the group was having some trouble with Endnote. So, I'm flexible. For example, in the quantitative training we do, some students use Stata, some use R, some use SPSS. The concepts are quite similar, and they tend to generalize, but there's some slight nuances in the commands. So, it's not really... I personally prefer now, like I said, Zotero over Endnote, and I've recently made the switch myself, but I wanted to give Joanne some help there. Good. Oh, yeah, excellent. Okay, glad you found that helpful. Okay, let me move on to this question before we come to Brian. Let me move on to this question about the website. So, I think some people might look at a website and think, well, I look at some of the most senior professors in the field who are very well established. They don't have websites. Why do I need to bother with that? And then you might look at some other people who are just very aggressive on social media, maybe haven't published a lot of papers, and you think, well, that they're wasting all this time on social media, not doing the things that they need to do to actually publish. And so where do you fall in between on that? Like, what kind of engagement do you want? What way do you want to take advantage of the digital age? I mean, you can see that I'm out in front here trying to create online communities of support for grads, which helps a lot of my students in a time of COVID, and a lot of students have been feeling isolated. So, firstly, what's going to happen? Most people who ask this question about a website, they're going on the job market. And they want to know, well, do I need a place to organize my work and present myself? And I would say at the point you're going in the job market, 100% yes. People will Google you. They will potentially look at your socials, right? When you go into an interview with a faculty member, the first thing I do when I have somebody come interview with me, I Google them. So you want to actually have some control over what your Google pulls up, and you don't want it to be maybe some of your Instagram photos where you're just completely smashed in a park somewhere. I don't know, but you want to have some control over your digital presence. And setting up a website is a good way to do that, because if you set up with your name, you should be able to engineer that to get right at the top of the hits on Google. So I think, especially in the job market, it can be quite helpful. If you're at the early stages, I see some students waste a lot of time on things that aren't going to help them. If you're at the early stages of your PhD, might not be the most useful thing to set up. It certainly can't hurt, but I wouldn't invest if it's something you find difficult. It doesn't have to be. If you go to WordPress and you get some hosting with one of the many options out there like GoDaddy, it doesn't have to cost you a lot. And even sometimes your university will offer you a page that you can take advantage of, but it's not always the most user-friendly thing to set up. I would not suggest wasting too much time or energy on it, because in the grand scheme of things, your need to publicize yourself is only going to start coming later as you go in the job market, and especially as you get on the tenure track and start applying for grants and amplifying your visibility. That said, if you want to do it, it certainly can't hurt. There are other aspects of social media that can really benefit you. I find in particular Twitter particularly helpful to hear the voices of people in your field, to stay on top of recent papers. A lot of professors will post their papers that they just produced. If you scroll through my Twitter feed, you'll see the recent papers that our teams come out with. We have another one coming out in the Journal of Health Economics that I'll probably tweet here in the coming days. So it's one great way to stay on top of your field. Go follow the key opinion leaders in your field, and that's going to help you find topics and be aware of what some live debates are going to be. It's like reading a newspaper, except that newspaper is just full of content in your field by leading voices and opinion leaders. So I would definitely take advantage of social media in that way. And of course, I'm biased. The Facebook group is a fantastic platform to meet with people in your field and support each other, get your questions answered here. So again, short answer. Website, definitely yes. Today is something helpful to do if you're going on the job market towards the end stages of your PhD. Maybe when you've got a paper or two that you want to promote. But I wouldn't, if it's easy for you, then do it. But I wouldn't waste too much time and energy worrying about it if you're at the master's or early stages of your PhD. So, guys, any questions about that media engagement strategy? And Amina, fantastic, great to have you join us here. Really, Constantine, great to have you join us as well. Welcome back, Maria. Also nice to have you on. Okay. I'm going to plow through, just give people a second on the stream to catch up. Yeah, good. Okay, let's go over. I want to shift gears to look here with Brian. Brian, I'm going to pull you on. And Brian, just welcome. Thanks for being willing to share with us. Just so people can get to know you a little bit, would you mind sharing a little bit, just kind of where you're at and what you're finding challenging at the moment, just so we can kind of widen the conversation to people here with us today?
Yeah. Good morning, afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. This morning here in Illinois, started this project here for my master's capstone thesis, and my professor and I we agreed on a topic and a thesis, and I just kind of took off, 100 miles an hour without really an outline. And I had an idea of where I wanted to go with this project, and I think I still do have an idea, but I'm struggling to kind of organize it in a way that makes sense. And I can't remember how exactly I came into contact with David, but let me say publicly, David, thank you for your help and your assistance with all this. Your story was motivating, and I relate to it, and don't know where I'd be without your help. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Brian. No, it's a pleasure. And I have to say, I love your topic. So can you maybe just say a couple lines about your topic? Again, that's going to help people in the group just kind of sink in.
Right. So I work in law enforcement, and my professor is a retired law enforcement officer too. And we kind of, through discovering what we're going to write about in this subject, is how the media and certain politicians affect the job of law enforcement officers. Everything from, false narratives being portrayed or partial truths being told and ran as news stories, which indirectly affects the law enforcement officers through public perception.
Yeah, exactly. It's just such a hot topic right now. And Brian, I know one of the things you're drawing on are some of the major events in the U.S. Around police use of force, as some case studies that you can dive deeper into. And so one of the things I think that happened with you, Brian, that I see so commonly with students is you have a lot of enthusiasm, energy about the topic. You dive in, you start writing, and then at some point you start to feel a little bit lost and overwhelmed because maybe you've written essays before, and that can really work when you're dealing with something that's maybe 500 to 1,500 words. But when you've got a beast here, like which is yours, 50 pages, more than 10,000 words, you've got to have a system in place, a structure, a backbone, or it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. So one of the things we stepped back and did, Brian, is we thought about, okay, what are the key things to build up your argument in your thesis? Kind of like as embedded in the idea of a thesis is you have a central argument, a central thesis you want to prove. And a couple of things that we realized we wanted to show, Brian, was that one, you wanted to show that the media has bias in its coverage. And you wanted to characterize the nature of the bias in that coverage of police use of violence. And so that created a natural kind of first component of the thesis. And then a second component that was quite important was, okay, if we can show that the media has bias and particularly negative coverage, what impact does that have on the police force? So just that, getting that, to prove just those two things, one, that there's a media bias is not something we can just assume away. this is an area that's really quite contested. So we've been working to prove that. And then the second is to document the many ways in which a media bias could be harmful. Both are quite substantial contributions. And then we've talked about a potential third qualitative component where you might do some interviews of police officers of what their experiences have been at the time or in response to some very negative media coverage about the police. Just a quick update for me, Brian. How has that? Have you made some headway on that conversation? We're looking at a deadline for Brian of December 15th, which is quite imminent. So we need to really focus on low-hanging fruit research that you can do in not too detailed a time. Have you heard any word back on that, Brian, from your faculty?
Not explicitly. So I did email the professor last night and asked him the question, and I have a teleconference with him this afternoon.
Okay.
I should hopefully have an answer by today.
Okay, fantastic. That it's just going to shape with it how much energy we use on different sections, how much space we devote to different sections of the thesis. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen and pull up Brian's document here. So let me make sure that's come out right. Hope you guys can all see this here. So what we're going to go through, and you can kind of, Brian, can you see my screen well enough like this, or would you rather let me make it a little bit bigger?
Yeah, I think if you make me small and make the...
Yeah, I think that's at the end of the day going to be a little bit better. Hang on a second. Let me try that. Okay. Sharing my screen here. Okay. How's that now? Can you see a little better now, Brian?
Much better.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So I'm going to zoom out. I kind of zoom out like this to get a macro view of the document. And we've got our introduction. I always recommend saving the introduction for last. And just kind of the macro structure is in place. We've got an introduction that's going to set out at the very end what the structure of the thesis is going to be. And then we're going to go into a first section where we're going to talk about the different types of, right in the first section. And I think, Brian, I want to put in a section 1 because we kind of have broken this into 2 main sections, possibly 3. Here in the section, having a look at evaluating potential media bias in coverage of police use of force. Right, this is a big section, and I think we'll need a little bit of signposting to get into this section. So I'm just going to put this as a placeholder. And then one thing that's really nice is I like the summary of types of media bias. So you're going to set a framework for what types of media biases are out there. How do we know if the media is biased? And you've identified a few main types of biases. And then you're going to look in a bunch of literature on the police to see what evidence. You're going to look at literature and case study events of what's happened to see if there's some evidence of the bias. So this creates a nice structure where you've got a conceptual framework around media bias. You're going to apply it to some data, which are events that have happened, and you're going to join that with existing literature review on the topic, and that's going to create a section of results and findings applying that. So, Brian, this is where I think you were getting a little bit stuck in applying the framework. So, tell me a little bit more. About that, where you've because we had 3 types of media biases, and where we last left off, we were kind of slotting some material into those 3 sections. How has that been going? Actually, this is starting to look pretty good compared with where we were before. How's that going? Are you feeling like you can slot the literature evidence into those 3 sections?
Right. So I think, and possibly it's just a result of maybe I've been looking at this paper for too long, too many hours in a row. But the 3 types of biases there that we talked about, gatekeeping, which is selection and telling the side of one perspective.
Exactly.
Statement bias being favorability towards one side and disfavor towards the other, and then coverage is giving more airtime to a particular party. I find some of the sections that we've written could possibly fit into more than one category.
Okay. That's fair. So, and sometimes this is common to encounter. If you've written something, and then you go back and superimpose an outline on it later, and your structure, you think, oh, actually, my point fits in both. In some cases, it just makes sense to break those apart. Do you have a concrete example that we could look at together here, where you found that? I'm just scanning through here.
Dig through.
Let me just look. No, this is definitely. I'm just scanning through, and there's a much clearer structure. I mean, I would say 90% of students feeling overwhelmed and lost is because they don't have a clear structure to their thesis. They don't have clarity on what they want to say before they start writing.
Right. So I'm not sure if it posted the same way on your end, but I'm looking at the middle of page 27. Excuse me.
Okay, I haven't changed the page number. Okay, so we're down on page 27.
Right there in the second paragraph.
So this is different. So this is outside of the bias section. So this is going through some old material we had that we want to thread back in.
Right.
Okay. Is this right here?
Right. So I'm looking at that section there where Director Comey said that
here.
Police leaders felt that their officers, were feeling the stress from.
Okay. So that's helpful. So this is the okay. So you've got a few points here that we want to break apart. So this is an example, this feeling that they have a target on their backs. This is an example of how this is our second section of the impact of negative coverage on the police. So this we want to move to that section. And that the harmful relationship and perceptions of trust from citizens, this is an impact. So that goes in a different section. This isn't about the bias of media coverage itself, but it's about the effects of that media coverage. Okay. This type of environment where police do not has led to reactive policing. That's another kind. So these actually are multiple effects. So just to bring everybody together, in our second section, that I'm just going to zoom back out in the document so people can have a more macro view of what's going on here. So we've got the evidence, we've got our results about the bias, and then you have a section where you talk about why maybe that media bias is there. Once you establish it's there, you speculate a bit on why it could be happening. And now we got a big section, and this is our section 2. This is section 2 in the thesis. How negative media coverage is detrimental to the police force. And what's great is what Brian and I worked on to help structure this is we created a conceptual framework here, which creates a nice guide. This is what I mean. Sometimes when I talk about a conceptual framework, people don't know what I mean, but it's just a kind of a schematic to organize your thinking in literature. So we found different types of impacts of negative media coverage: worse officer morale, worse recruitment, worse retention, reactive policing, defunding, and those could perversely, the media could, by leading this, they could cause disruptions to the police force, less crime prevention, and overall, perversely, worse crime. So, Brian, it looks to me that section there goes here in the impact of morale, when that point about officer feeling like they have a target on their back. And one thing I like to do is split the document so that if I have to move things around, so I can look at two sections at once, just like this. I don't know if you guys ever do this, but it is really helpful. And let's get down. Always give yourself page numbers so you can help yourself find things. It was page 27, right, Brian?
Yes.
I think so. So the one that you're struggling to place is here, Director Comey.
Right.
So, yeah. So a lot of what we're doing here. So I actually think, Brian, you've got this. I think you've had trouble placing because it's not just you can cut and paste this into one spot. With our change structure, this is the part about officer morale. This is a part about the public perceptions of the police. And this is a part about reactive policing. So it actually, this breaks across 3 sections. So to do that, I think you're going to talk first about morale. So I'm just going to put this here. And guys, I think you don't have to worry about, sometimes you have to make things messy before making them neat again. And so let's move this here. This was the part about public relations with the police. Where does that go? We have a section on reactive policing here. Where do we have the section on public attitudes towards the police? Impact on defunding. We need an impact on public attitudes towards the police. And we might need to update our conceptual framework to include that if we don't have it already. And I've just thrown off my pages. And we got one more on reactive policing that I just lost. Where did I put that? Hang on, it was on page 27. I just lost that sentence on reactive policing. Here it is. Okay. And let's go. This goes in our reactive policing section. So because you've got a lot of material, Brian, we just want to get everything in the right section at this point, and then we'll worry about making the writing nice. So does that make sense, Brian, how I've distributed that across the sections?
It does, and while we're talking here, I found on the bottom of page 30, kind of getting back to the bias that we're talking about and how law enforcement is portrayed. If you look at the bottom of page 30, that paragraph there under media coverage of police, starting with the second sentence, how police are depicted in Hollywood.
I'm lost. I'm on page 30.
Okay, maybe it's shifted down. It's under the heading media coverage of police.
Oh, here. Yeah, so exactly. So this is going to go, exactly. So this was an old section. We now have a framework. So let's break this apart too. And you can see where, Brian, for everybody watching, you can see where we are, where we're really dealing with the macro structure to get everything in a clear framework, so we can make a stronger case, present the evidence in a way that people can understand and digest more easily, and also, Brian, avoid a massive headache for you. So this is great. I like this whole 2011. Police are portrayed in cartoons as a fat, lazy, donut-eating slobs, fail to catch criminals. So this is a different type of media. These are cartoons and television, which is different from covering the news events. So I know one thing we've talked about is general. You spotted a tension in how police are portrayed as heroes in a lot of law and order type shows and cop shows. But then when it's actual news and it's real life, they're sometimes portrayed as villains. I think what we might want to do is create we can do this in two ways in our structure. So most of what you've been talking about has focused on actual news events of a real world event. Well, I think you want to have some section, so that's news media. This is different though. This is fictional media. And that can be books, TV, film. We can either create a separate section, or we can kind of, in a discussion, interpret our findings about the news media in light of other media, not fiction media, where police are portrayed. So you got a choice there. How do you want to do that?
I think maybe threading it into the discussion, because as you mentioned, this isn't something that's in the newspapers or whatever. This is more of the Simpsons, Chief Wiggum, Barney Fife, that kind of thing, and how
exactly
fictional characters.
So that's my sense too, and so I think you've got here. I think your point that you make in the discussion, and this you want to reflect in your topic sentence, that remember you want each of your topic sentences to make one point of what your paragraph is about. And really well written scientific writing, you can almost just jump paragraph to paragraph, just reading the first sentence and get what's going on. So I would put this in the discussion somewhere of the media bias section. So I would have a mini discussion here of implications of media bias, or say, news media bias in comparative perspective, or some section where we're going to park this for now. And we also had a discussion at the very end here, but let's just create a home for this in our first big section of the paper. Okay, so we got section 2, and we've got a framework. Okay, we're still beyond the point. We're still not at the point, Brian, where I think we want to make micro edits and start cleaning this up. I think the big thing to do right now is just get everything in the right place.
Right, and that's kind of what's causing me the most stress is I've got down there, page 32, kind of 33, talking about media coverage of the pandemic and how politicians are getting involved, certain
Yeah.
media biases towards one political party versus the other.
So yeah, so these things here where you start going into China, I think these theory things, anything like this on theory, that is a nice thing when you have this discussion, your theory and types of media bias. That's kind of like the background framework for how you're going to evaluate media bias. So I would move that there. And I remember we used to have a section on coronavirus that I took out because it just started going off in a different direction from what you need. It was great material. And I think sometimes some students have trouble. It's like, kill your darlings. You develop this great section, but then later you realize it doesn't actually fit with the thesis' central argument that you're making. So I would suggest this, Brian. I'm just going to highlight this in comments for you. I think this you want to thread this into the media bias framework section, and I'll just put a comment in that media bias framework section up here where you actually do a review of kind of, well, if there's media bias, how do we know? Right. So this section is about if there's media bias, what methods could tell us if there is a media bias. And this, I think, whoops, that doesn't go there. Potentially move China-related material here. And then here you just want to add some foreground about you really want to add some signposting so your readers know where you're taking them, and you've done that really nicely here in this. The rest of the capstone is as follows. When you say section X, right, in the first section you're going to test for the alternative media types of bias. So right, so here you just need something like before turning into evaluating the presence of media bias in news coverage about the police, I first must review the alternative frameworks and theories for identifying, for understanding what this bias is and how to detect it. Something along these lines. Here is just your signposting to tell readers, okay, you're about to dive into this, but you need to have a section looking at the main types of media bias, main theories and types that exist. And much of this is coming from political science literature, I suspect, and communications. So you might want to even say something what literatures you're drawing on. Might even be helpful here.
Right, and the next thing is there's a section towards the end called the media and politics, and I think there's a lot of useful stuff in there. I think it's a good section of writing, but I don't know where to put it.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think there are going to be definitely some people who are watching today who can relate to this process. Who, if you guys are watching and you have felt lost in a document before, sometimes the best thing to do is almost what we've done with Brian here. Take a step back. Now that you've dug into it, sometimes you got into it at all its messiness, and what you know and understand halfway through is different from what you knew at the beginning. And that's good. That's progress. But what that may require is starting the writing almost fresh from the point of the knowledge you have now, then try to force fit a structure that no longer makes sense with what you've learned. And I think that's what we're doing here, Brian. And so we're kind of tapping now all these good bits. So where is that good bit that you were saying now that we want to look at? Like here, this coronavirus is still here. I think that's probably going to have to go.
Yeah, I'm talking about the media and politics headers towards the end.
Okay. This here. Okay. Let's put this here. So exactly. So this is some nice background. This media and politics. So we've got a section that we added. And sometimes, guys, if you can't find something you feel like it doesn't fit, you may need to update your outline and create a new section. You really want to have a robust outline so that everything has a home. this okay. So this is more general. I think is more general discussion about media bias in the U.S. Of which what you're looking at the police force is just one instance, one expression of that bigger conversation on media bias.
Mhm.
Um, so this is nice. I mean, this is a nice thing on who's likely to believe these media biases. Um, so this cultivation theory, I think, is something that you want to cover. That you've mentioned a few times. I think that needs to come in there. Um, but this is a kind of so yeah. Put that in because remember, more significant amount of news consumption. You're right. I guess if you keep repeatedly consuming the same thing over and over, you start to believe it. It's almost like a proof by repeated assertion rather
Mhm.
than actual any validity. You've just heard it so much that you start to believe it. So I think that this needs to go. I want these theories. I want these things to go in. So you have this section. Some of these things are who is more likely to believe this or not, and I think that needs to go somewhere. Um, but what I've seen in your evidence is you don't. I don't know if you have direct evidence on who is likely to believe specifically the biased police coverage. I know you seem to have things about the general public, but maybe not as fine grained. Say maybe low income groups are more likely to believe uh, the negative, the biased police coverage. So I think I would put that. I would move this stuff to this general discussion here. So main types of media bias and who is likely to believe this false information. I think that goes here, and so I think you want to add here what was it? The cultivation theory, I believe it
Mhm.
was discussion. I think that works pretty well. Um, yeah, we're gonna need to do so. Right now, we're still doing macro stuff. We're gonna need to do some micro stuff to bring this into order. But let's just keep getting all the content in the right place. Um, uh, Yeah, so then you have different so main types of media bias. So you've got a few things in the types of media bias. You've got different actors. So you've got print, radio, TV. You've got the people who are likely to believe, more or less likely to believe it, and then you got the different types of bias. So this is really the section you want to get into that kind of rich discussion. Um, and this is good. I like the way you've extended this here. Really nice. Okay, Brian. What else are you struggling with at the moment in the document?
So when I was looking at the securing national interest
Mm-hmm.
control section down the mid 30s pages area, that I know that the China Communist Party. I wonder if there was a way to thread that into the gatekeeping since they're censoring which stories can be published.
So I think I would put that when you talk about because this isn't really directly part of your evidence or your argument about the police. Um, um, yeah, this is kind of extraneous. I think this is just background about. I mean, maybe you'd want to have this centralized media control theory, um, but the U.S. doesn't have. Uh, to my knowledge, not like where, for example, in Italy, Berlusconi owned kind of the certain major media outlets, and it was the Berlusconi channel. It was just producing stuff that was favorable to Berlusconi. I don't know if that's really. There's definitely some concentrated ownership on the boards of directors of major media companies, and there's only a handful that control the media. But I see this as a little bit extraneous to your argument, but if you want to include it, I do think it. I agree with you. It fits on this gatekeeping bias of which kind of presents selectively the point of view of one group and not the other group. That could go. I think this comes back in your in discussing the gatekeeping bias, and you could certainly extend on this. Or if you want China, you could say box 1 shows an example of a gatekeeping bias from China, and create a big box that then you have this box as like a short anecdote or piece of evidence about how a gatekeeping bias has worked in China. Could fit there. Does that make
Right.
sense,
So
Brian?
I haven't seen the boxes used before. Where does that go?
So usually a box is you just kind of like where you have a table or figure. We'll eventually have the tables and figures at the end of the document. But you come here, always make a section break to keep things tidy, section break. And then you might have box 1, example of gatekeeping bias in China or something like that. And then we would take this China section and move it down. We would just take this out. And you're right, your coronavirus you could use as a box as an evidence cluster there. Right? This would be a way to keep your structure intact, but keep your material. And so then what we would do, I'm not saying you necessarily need to keep it this way. It's just one way to not bog everything. Box 1 provides an example of how gatekeeping bias occurs in Chinese. Provides an extreme, I think, and it is quite an extreme example, China, where there is centralized media control. Right. And then what you do is to keep yourself tidy for later, because maybe at the very end you want to put in the box, you just put box about here. Does that make sense, Brian?
It does. And I wondered if I should make a box for the coronavirus coverage.
Yeah, totally. So I think it's nice. You have this general discussion about media bias, and if you want to include that, this is the place. So we want to keep that general discussion separate so your readers don't get confused, because before it was jumping a bit between both. So that here you can get the results, and you're just straight on the money for the material you have about the police, biases in the police.
Right. And I think the politics session, I think that fits into the main discussion and how some of these politicians are pushing for police reform. I think that fits somewhere up top, but I just can't figure out where.
Well, so that is, again, remember we talked about the influence. Where's our conceptual framework? I like to put the conceptual framework at the end of the document with the figures and boxes. In fact, I'm going to do that now. So let's just do this now. Figure 1 about here. So this here is kind of the negative coverage, the defunding of the police. This branch here is they have an impact on the police. So we could tweak this conceptual framework, say negative media coverage influences, and we need to update this conceptual framework, I'm aware now, to public attitudes and politicians' attitudes. So we do need to tweak the conceptual framework a little bit. I would put that, we just created today this new section here, public and political attitudes to the police. I would put that here. So go through and talk about the impact on public attitudes, impact on politicians' attitudes. All that material can come here. And I'm just moving this to the end of the document to keep things tidy. So figure 1. Do you think you can work with that, Brian?
I think I'm closer now. There's still a section where I'm bringing in background on Vice President Agnew and how he kind of I don't want to say started, but really shine light on some of the media bias and politics. And I'm not sure if that's going to be a box or if that's going to fit.
Where is that?
Probably down late 30s now. The pages are moving around, but
yeah. Oh wait,
under,
about Barack Obama? No.
Politics, media, and justice.
Politics, media, and justice. Vice President Agnew. Okay. So I think this is nice. I think you could do a small section on history and go into types of bias. You could. This maybe goes into a little more detail than you need here. So again, I think some of these things you want to have a nice linear flow to your argument, and not have it like twist and spin like the whirling dervish. It's great for a New Yorker article because it's going to make for a very gripping. Right? If you're writing a mystery novel, you want that. But for academic writing, you want a straight line. So I would put that, I would say the history here, right? Coverage, just typo. Say history, and you might want to say your big point is that, concerns about media bias trace back to XXX. And then you could do the Agnew example briefly and maybe perhaps put the longer story in a box. You could do it that way.
So would that go under the history of the media section?
I think you can just do this here, that you must first review alternative frameworks and theories for understanding what this bias is, how to detect it. And, the concerns about media bias are not new, as far back as the 19th century or when it was. There were concerns about bias in the media. Vice President Agnew and whatever date, had these concerns and what he did. Yeah, it's just again, Brian. I think the vast majority of what we got here is just finding a home for your material.
Yeah, I think the last burning question that I have is the history of the media, the early days of the media. Is that in the right place, or does it need to go somewhere else?
Where is that now?
Probably mid to late 30s.
Yeah, no. So remember, at the end of this, after we get to the impact on defunding, now everything after here, exactly. You've got this break. You're gonna have your section 3, which is either gonna be your qualitative research, your interviews, and we want to leave space for that. I mean, sometimes I think people think, oh, well, how am I gonna get 50 pages? You're not gonna have any trouble getting 50 pages. But if not, you're gonna go straight into that's when you're gonna have your discussion, where you're gonna go through and interpret your findings, right? You're gonna restate what you found, right? So hopefully what you're going to say is my research has demonstrated that there is a media bias towards negative coverage of the police. I also find that this negative coverage has a series of potential, harms to the police's functioning, including XXX, something like this. I don't want to write it now. So that's where that's going to go. So all this stuff that you've got here, we should have a robust outline. You should be able to find a home for it going forward. So I'm going to save this document, Brian, get it back over to you for our next session. And I just want to thank you again for being willing to just, you put yourself out there like that to share for the good of the community here. And I know that people really appreciate that because these are the kinds of struggles so many students have all the time in trying to work through documents, and so many students don't finish for this reason. We got some really nice comments coming through. You make this quick like a piece of cake. Thank you. I mean, I've done this a few times. Some other people are saying thank you. So I just want to say, now I'm able to look at the comments. Brian, this really helps a lot of people, and I just, again, a big thank you to you for being willing to share with the Fast Track community.
Yeah, no, the pleasure is mine. I feel like I'm on an island here, and this is super helpful.
Good. Okay. So pleased to hear it. Guys, Fridays, this is your chance to get support from me. It really is like a piece of cake for me. After you've done this for 20 years, you could do some of this in your sleep. And I just love, Brian, I just love your topic. It's so important going straight into these big debates. And I'm going to push you to publish it, because that's really the standard I am for with students. We want to get you to the bar of publishing, because that's going to help you down the road in your career. It's like money in the bank for you. It really shows a high level of intellectual capability and high level of intellectual leadership in your field, that you can produce new knowledge. So yeah, Brian, I'm also going to be pushing you. So that document will be back in your inbox. Thanks everybody for joining us today. And comment below in this video, if you've had some trouble exporting from Web of Science or Pubmed. As we saw today, Web of Science is not always a piece of cake. It takes some fiddling, but you get there in the end. And for those of you, if you're setting up your website, let us know. We've got some great tools to make that easy for you. If you're interested in that, send me a DM and we'll link you up to those. But I recommend that only for those of you in the job market. And if you guys have been struggling with your outline, if you've been going in circles in a document like Brian, encourage you to get in touch and take advantage of the support that's there to help you, because I felt that way before. Brian, I know you know that's a miserable feeling. I don't want any of you guys to feel isolated or alone in this journey. All right, have a great weekend, everybody. Brian, we'll be in
Thanks.
touch here shortly.
See you,
Bye
David.
for now. Bye.